Meet Amenhotep, not a pharaoh, but a mummification assistant. His job? Removing a dead noble's brain through the nose with a hooked bronze rod before the body started rotting. No gloves, no masks, just bare hands, working in the thick stench of decay every single day. This is the untold story of Amenhotep and thousands like him. Workers who handled the filth so Egypt's elite could live in pristine luxury. Ever wonder who got their hands dirty so the pharaoh could shine? Their suffering stayed hidden, their labor erased from the grand picture. But the real story starts with what they had to do first. Let's talk about the brain hookers, the hemnetger, ancient Egypt's mummification assistants whose first job was pulling out the brain through the nose. Forget scalpels or surgical precision. They used a hooked bronze rod, jamming it up the nostril and swirling it around until the brain turned into soup. Then, they'd haul out the gray matter bit by bit, sometimes fishing for stubborn chunks like they were unclogging a drain. All of this happened with bare hands, leaning over bodies already starting to bloat and reek in the desert heat. This was just the start of a brutal 70-day process. Every day, these workers handled corpses in every state of decay. No gloves, no masks, just sweat dripping down their faces and soaking into open wounds. The smell stuck to them, their clothes, their hair. Some workers developed sinus infections from breathing in particles of rotting flesh. Others ended up with chemical burns from the natron salt used to dry out the bodies. Modern researchers have tried to recreate this process. With a replica bronze hook, it took 4 hours of twisting and yanking to get a brain out. Chunks of tissue got stuck, and someone had to reach in and clear the nasal passage by hand. Every slip risked puncturing the skull or their own fingers. Archaeologists have found these hooks, still crusted with dried organic matter, showing they were reused over and over again. And what did these workers get for their trouble? Historical records suggest their rations were meager. Onions, a bit of beer, barely enough to make up for the health risks. They earned less than pyramid builders and had almost no status. Some of the tools found in mass graves had traces of tissue from several people, hinting that cleaning between jobs wasn't a priority. Many mummification assistants never lived past 30. Their skeletons tell the story. Infections in the hands, chemical burns, spinal damage from lifting bodies. Even slaves tried to avoid this work when they could. Temple records mention that being sent to the place of the hooks was a punishment for misbehaving slaves. Nobody wanted this job. Museums like to show off golden canopic jars, but they rarely mention the workers who had to reach into a stew of organs and fluids to fill them. The natron salt that preserved the dead ate away at living skin, leaving permanent scars. These workers toiled in open-air workshops with vultures circling overhead, waiting for scraps. The irony? The people who prepared the dead for eternity couldn't afford proper burials themselves. Their graves were outside cemetery walls, marked only by a few onions or rough linen wrappings stained brown from years of handling embalming fluids. No golden masks, just the residue of a lifetime spent cleaning up after the rich. So the next time you see a perfectly preserved mummy, remember the people who made it possible. And if you think that's bad, imagine the workers who had to deal with the living's mess instead of the dead's. Imagine carrying baskets of human waste through crowded streets because things are about to get even messier. Think taking out the trash is a gross chore? Ancient Egyptian sanitation workers had a job that made modern garbage duty look like a spa day. These were the slave carriers of filth, the people responsible for removing waste from public latrines in cities like Thebes and Memphis. No plumbing, no sewage systems, just heavy baskets full of human waste balanced on their heads as they navigated packed city streets. Their workday started before sunrise. The carriers emptied clay pots from households and public toilets, dumping the contents into large woven baskets. Each basket could weigh up to 40 pounds, and they'd haul them for miles to dumping grounds outside the city. One wrong move, and the contents would spill, soaking their backs and burning their skin. Archaeologists saw widespread spinal injuries in the skeletons of these workers, clear evidence of years spent lugging heavy loads. Temple complexes had their own cleaning crews. While priests performed their rituals, low-status workers scraped dried waste off limestone floors every morning with copper blades. Excavations at Karnak revealed grooves worn deep into the stone from centuries of scraping. These workers weren't even allowed inside the temples. They were banned for reasons of religious purity. The health risks were everywhere. Studies of ancient remains show parasite eggs at rates far above normal, roundworms, tapeworms, and a flatworm that causes liver disease. Many workers suffered permanent rashes from waste splashing on their legs. Food prep areas often sat dangerously close to waste sites, making contamination a daily reality. Payment for all this was barely worth mentioning. Temple records show these workers got old linen scraps and spoiled grain, stuff nobody else wanted. Wall paintings show sewage carriers with bald patches, probably from waste spills burning their scalps. The youngest workers got the worst jobs. Small boys were sent into narrow sewer channels beneath palaces to push waste along with wooden paddles. Archaeologists at Amarna found children's skeletons in these tunnels, some with crushed ribs from cave-ins. How would you feel if your kids vanished down a drain at age 12? Medical papyri mention treating children for waste sickness after months spent in palace drains. Some workers developed specialized skills like crafting limestone toilet seats for the wealthy or weaving reed mats for disposal, but most just carried baskets until their bodies gave out. Few lived past 35. Tomb paintings never show this work, but archaeologists have found the tools: encrusted baskets, chipped scraping blades, and head pads stained brown from years of use. At Abusir, a rare worker's burial included his broken ladle and a tiny limestone toilet carving. The only thanks he ever got for a lifetime of dirty labor. And if you think that's the worst job in Egypt, just wait. There was a whole class of workers who spent every day ankle deep in something even more dangerous. Ever had a really bad day at work? Imagine spending yours wading through miles of irrigation canals packed with dead animals, butcher scraps, rotten food, and even failed mummification attempts. That was the daily reality for ancient Egyptian canal dredgers, the workers who kept the Nile's water moving and the fields alive. These workers didn't just scoop out mud and reeds. The canals turned into dumping grounds for anything people wanted to get rid of. By the time the dredgers got there, everything had stewed together in the sun for weeks. They worked barefoot, feeling their way through thick sludge because the water was too murky to see the bottom. Sometimes they'd step on sharp pottery shards or fish bones hidden just beneath the surface. Health problems came with the territory. Many dredgers developed a flesh-eating infection from standing in contaminated water day after day. Imagine that rotting beneath your toes every day. The pay was miserable. Dredgers got 2 measures of barley and a jug of weak beer per day, less than half what pyramid builders earned. Archaeologists have found their huts right on the canal banks, so they slept just steps from the filth they cleared all day. Their wooden rakes and woven baskets wore out quickly in the harsh conditions, and there was never enough money to replace them. The health toll was brutal and constant. Examinations of dredger remains show they suffered from parasites, respiratory problems from breathing in gas bubbles, and hand injuries from sharp debris. Many lived with open sores and permanent scarring. Most never made it to old age. Children weren't spared either. Small boys were sent to work the shallows, scooping out floating waste in baskets strapped to their backs. Remains from Fayum show stunted growth and curved spines from carrying heavy loads at a young age. Oddly enough, canal dredgers saved lives. By keeping the water flowing, they stopped cholera outbreaks that could kill thousands, but they died from the same diseases they worked to prevent. And while grown men and boys faced all this in the canals, some children had it even worse, spending their days waist-deep in swamps, harvesting papyrus under a cloud of biting insects. Papyrus swamps in ancient Egypt weren't just wetlands, they were workplaces for children. The empire's endless appetite for papyrus scrolls meant a steady demand for young laborers. Children began as early as 8 years old, spending their days in knee-deep water, cutting reeds for hours on end. There was no summer break, no easy chores, just a cycle of forced labor that shaped their entire childhood. Harvesting papyrus sounds simple on paper. Slice the tall reeds, bundle them up, and float them downstream. But the reality was harsh. Kids waded through water swarming with mosquitoes and biting flies. Leeches latched onto their legs, and there was no escape from the constant itch and sting. Constant bending in the swamp led to curved spines and aching joints, while fingers developed deep grooves from gripping knives all day. Some bones fused together from infections that never got treated. At sites like Fayum, mass graves show rows of children with the same wrist injuries, all from repeating the same cutting motion day after day. Malnutrition was rampant, examinations of ancient teeth reveal that half the children had scurvy by age 10. Their huts, built right on the swamp's edge, had no floors, just mud and standing water that bred even more parasites. Rats often bit sleeping children, leaving scars that lasted longer than the bruises from their overseers. Supervisors didn't make things easier. Some kids were tied to boats with rope leashes to keep them from running away. If they slowed down or tried to rest, their rations got cut. Pay was laughable. 2 loaves of bread a day, barely enough to keep up with the calories burned fighting the swamp. Temple records mention scribes complaining about stained papyrus when kids bled on the reeds. No one cared that those stains came from open cuts and infected wounds. The work itself was dangerous. Kids used sharpened shells as knives, which slipped easily and led to deep gashes. Reed bundles sometimes hid venomous snakes, and a careless grab could mean a bite that no one bothered to treat. The empire ran on papyrus. Every tax record, every temple scroll, every letter home started with a child in the swamp, doing work no one else wanted. While these kids battled bloodsuckers in swamps, downriver another horror awaited: fish gutting under the sun. Fish gutter boys along the Nile had a job that stuck with them for life, literally. They spent their days on the docks, scaling, gutting, and filleting thousands of fish under the relentless Egyptian sun. Most started around age 8, working 12-hour shifts with nothing but sharpened shells and flint knives. The smell was so overpowering that even stray dogs kept their distance. The Nile's fish industry was a machine. At the big docks, workers stood on slick wooden platforms covered in fish guts, scraping scales and slicing bellies open with bare hands. There were no gloves or aprons, just skin and bone, always at risk. Hands split open from constant cuts, and the wounds rarely healed before new ones appeared. Most fish gutter boys earned little more than scraps of fish, and they usually ate whatever they could on the spot. No one wanted to bring that stench home. The health toll was brutal. Fingers swelled up and turned purple from infected cuts, and many workers lost the use of their hands. Chronic exposure to fish blood and guts led to long-term damage in both hands and eyes. Some went blind before reaching adulthood and were then put to work sniffing out spoiled fish. The work sites themselves were dangerous. Platforms gave way without warning, sending workers plunging into Nile water thick with waste. Crocodiles lurked just beneath the surface, and every season, someone disappeared for good. The stench was impossible to escape. Workers reeked so badly that they were banned from markets and public wells. Some were forced to sleep downwind of the nearest village. The smell clung long after their shifts ended, marking them as fish gutter boys even when they tried to leave the job behind. Child laborers suffered the most. Their small hands were perfect for scooping guts from tilapia, and the endless bending left many with hunched backs and compressed spines. Contracts often trapped entire families in the trade, generation after generation. The docks were a magnet for all kinds of pests. Vultures circled overhead, waiting for scraps. Rats swarmed the waste piles, and boys sometimes spent their nights beating them away with sticks. Flies bit at exposed skin all day, and workers wrote home complaining about the constant irritation. All this, and the fish gutter boys were still considered lucky compared to the workers who spent their days in temple slaughterhouses ankle-deep in animal blood. Step into an ancient Egyptian temple slaughterhouse, and you'll find anything but peace. These were places of constant death, where workers spent their days surrounded by the noise and chaos of animal sacrifice. The numbers were staggering. Temple records talk about hundreds of cattle and geese sacrificed every month. During festivals, the pace picked up so much that animals were brought in one after another, with hardly a break between. The floors told the story. Decades of blood soaked into the sand and stone until everything underfoot was sticky and dark. Special drainage channels ran beneath the slaughter areas, but they clogged all the time, leaving workers to wade through pools of blood during the busiest days. Some developed permanent redness on their skin from constant contact with blood and animal waste. Temple records even mention something called the Red Curse, a skin condition that marked butchers for life. The tools weren't much better. Butchers hacked through bone and hide with copper knives that dulled quickly, forcing them to use more force with every cut. Over time, workers developed joint damage and cartilage problems from the repetitive, brutal motions. Archaeologists have found skeletons with worn arm bones and wrists, telling you exactly how hard this job was. The knives themselves are covered in deep grooves from endless sharpening. There was no room for error. Every animal had to be processed according to strict religious rules. Workers reached into still warm carcasses to pull out organs for the priests to inspect. If an organ, like the gallbladder, was damaged or torn, the penalties were harsh: lost pay, beatings, or worse. Health problems were everywhere. Handling sick animals led to chronic diseases, joint pain, fever, and sometimes permanent blindness from blood splashing into the eyes. Kids didn't escape the worst jobs. Their small hands were perfect for cleaning out intestines, so they spent hours turning them inside out for sausage casings. Some choked on the gases from rotten organs. The pay was barely worth it. Butchers got the scraps, the worst cuts like lungs and spinal cords, and had to pay fines if they ate anything better. Social rules kept butchers at the bottom. Even though their work was necessary for temple rituals, they were banned from most ceremonies and forbidden to live near sacred wells. Excavations at Memphis turned up mass graves of butchers, many with broken bones from collapsing at work. Some tried to run. Temple records mention butchers who fled their jobs, only to be punished by being forced to wear rotting animal skins or branded so they could never work anywhere else. And if standing ankle-deep in blood wasn't bad enough, the next group of workers faced a different kind of danger: the men who packed bodies with corrosive salt, slowly sacrificing their own flesh for the sake of the dead. The natron salt packers had a job that looked simple from the outside: just shovel white powder onto a body and walk away. But this wasn't table salt, it was natron, a harsh mineral scraped from dried lake beds, so caustic it burned through skin and nails. Workers spent long shifts packing corpses with natron, rubbing it into every fold and cavity. The powder worked its magic on the dead, but it destroyed the living. Every day followed the same brutal routine. After the embalmers finished with the head, salt packers stuffed bodies with natron packets, then poured more over the skin and pressed it in by hand. The salt didn't just dry out the corpse, it ate through the workers' fingernails, leaving blackened stumps. Workers often lost fingernails and bled constantly from cracked skin. Temple medical texts talk about hands that weep red, and some workers wrapped their fingers in linen, but it never lasted long. The salt made its way into everything, breathing in the fine powder shredded lungs and left workers coughing for hours. Eyes didn't stand a chance. Salt dust floated in the air, scratching corneas and causing vision loss. Historical records from Saqqara mention hundreds of cases of salt blindness. Some workers ended up feeling their way through the workshops by touch, and if you lost your sight, you got put on linen wrapping duty instead. The workshops themselves were nightmares. Floors were crusted with salt, and workers stood in toxic salt baths that ate at skin, lungs, and tools alike. Child labor was common. Small hands were perfect for packing natron into tight spaces, so children as young as 8 were put to work. Their bones show stunted growth and twisted ribs from breathing salt dust. Workers came up with desperate tricks to cope. Some rubbed garlic on their hands to fight infection, turning every cut into a burning mess. Others wrapped their fingers in linen, but the salt soaked through in no time. Here's the kicker. The same natron that left workers scarred and broken preserved the pharaohs so well that you can still see fingerprints on some mummies today. The rich got eternity. The packers got bodies that fell apart before they even hit the grave. But the real cost of all this labor wasn't just in lost fingers or ruined lungs. It was something much bigger, something the history books rarely mention. Textbooks love to show off the pyramids, but they skip right past the mass graves dug beside those monuments. Archaeologists uncovered bodies stacked in unmarked pits, workers tossed in without ceremony, their skeletons telling a story that's a lot messier than the official version. If you look past the gold and stone, you see what really happened to the people who kept Egypt running. Bodies broken by daily labor and lives cut short by disease. Start with the mummification workers. Most of them suffered from chronic sinus infections thanks to years spent breathing in corpse dust and salt particles. Their lungs often held traces of embalming chemicals, and their hands showed permanent stains from handling rotting flesh. Some skulls were missing nasal bones entirely, eaten away by constant exposure to salt and decay. Canal dredgers had it just as bad, if not worse. Examinations of their remains show almost every worker carried multiple parasites. Some skeletons even had leech mouthparts still lodged in their ankle bones. The worst cases showed fused toes, stumps left behind by infections that made every step painful. These men and boys spent their lives wading through filth, and their bodies paid the price. Papyrus swamp kids weren't spared either. Child skeletons from harvesting sites show stunted growth. Some 12-year-olds barely reached 4 feet tall. Teeth reveal years of malnutrition, and their bones are bowed from hauling heavy reeds day after day. Archaeologists have even found leeches fossilized onto hip bones, a grim reminder of what these kids endured. Fish gutter boys and temple butchers left behind their own evidence. Fish workers' bones sometimes have a greenish tint from years of handling copper tools and fish acids. Their hands were often fused or missing fingers from untreated infections. Temple butchers' remains show damage from hacking through bone for years. Some spines fused together from standing on blood-slick floors. Researchers have even found goose vertebrae embedded in foot bones, proof that the animals sometimes fought back. Natron salt packers suffered the slowest deaths. Their bones show sky-high sodium levels, and some were naturally mummified by the very salt that ruined their lives. Jaw joints froze open from salt crystals, and skin turned tough and leathery. In a few cases, their bodies were preserved so well that the scars from chemical burns are still visible. Sometimes the tragedy spread to whole families. Archaeologists found entire households wiped out by the same workplace diseases. Parents and children buried side by side, all marked by the same infections and injuries. Modern pathology paints a clear picture. These jobs wore down bodies in every possible way. Workers' teeth ground down from eating gritty bread, joints fused from endless repetitive motions, and even their ear bones showed damage from years of loud, punishing work. Exhaustion was the final blow. Most skeletons show compression fractures in the spine, a sign that nobody ever got a real break. Visit a workers' cemetery and you won't see gold or fancy tombs. Laborers were buried in reed mats, sometimes with nothing but a single tool as a memorial. At Giza, one pit held hundreds of canal workers thrown in together. The people who built the pharaoh's tomb forgotten as soon as the job was done. This was the true cost of keeping Egypt's system going. The evidence is there, carved into bone and buried in the dirt. And while the ancient Egyptians loved to talk about cosmic order and balance, the reality for the workers was anything but fair. Ma'at. The word shows up on every temple wall, every papyrus scroll. Cosmic balance, order, the glue that held Egypt together. But did their idea of order really include so much hidden suffering? While priests chanted about harmony, the reality was that someone else was always cleaning up the mess. The same officials who wrote purity laws hired workers to haul sewage and blood. The same priests who demanded spotless rituals ordered another round of animal slaughter, knowing exactly who would be left to scrub the floors. Workers sometimes pushed back. At Deir el-Medina, tomb builders once stopped work and refused to pick up their tools until their demands, more food, fewer beatings, some clean bandages, were heard. The officials called it a temporary work stoppage, but the graffiti left behind tells the real story. One block is scratched with a simple message: "Our children are hungry." These little acts of resistance are all that's left of the workers' voices. The people in charge weren't clueless. Medical papyri spell out treatments for injuries like salt hands and festering wounds, not to heal, but just to get workers back on the job faster. One text says to wrap cracked skin in linen and return to the vats within 7 days. Officials calculated rations of beer and onions to keep workers going, but never enough to let them forget the pain. It was all about keeping the system running, no matter the cost. Archaeologists now see the pattern. Entire communities of workers show the same injuries, the same curved spines, and fused joints. At Karnak, most canal dredgers had nearly identical spinal damage, all at the same place. This wasn't just bad luck. The system needed bodies that could take punishment, just enough to last another season. Egyptian art never shows this side. Tomb paintings are full of smiling fishermen and orderly sacrifices, but you never see the children gutting fish or the butchers wading through blood. Even the famous weighing of the heart scene skips the part where someone had to mop up after the ceremony. Maat's feather might balance the scales, but who cleaned the scales afterward? The graves tell a different story. At Abydos, a mass grave held workers buried with a single dried fish. No gold, no spells, just the same rations they got in life. Others were found with tools chained to their wrists, their only identity a job title scratched on the tomb. Fish gutter, sewage carrier, canal dredger. Today's museums still glorify pharaohs while sidelining these laborers. Try finding a display about the kid who harvested papyrus with leeches on his legs. You'll be looking a long time. Some workers left small marks, fingerprints pressed into plaster, bits of debris mixed into mortar, fish scales hidden in temple bricks. These weren't mistakes. They were quiet reminders that real people suffered to make Egypt's glory possible. Generations bore the same scars: a father's curved spine, a daughter's scarred hands, a grandmother's twisted joints, each one a record of labor passed down and repeated. This wasn't just hard work. It was suffering built into the system, a hidden price for the balance Egypt claimed to cherish. So when you look at what survived, the gold, the monuments, the perfect masks, remember the hands that made them. The next time you see a pharaoh's mask gleaming behind glass, think about what it cost to keep it so bright. Egypt's greatness didn't come from gods or gold. It came from hands cracked by salt burns, legs swollen from leech bites, and fingernails lost to rot. History classes love to celebrate pharaohs and treasures, but the real story is in the fish gutter boys and the kids who harvested papyrus with their feet in the mud. Civilizations are built on hidden labor, on people who did the jobs nobody else wanted. Did their suffering shape Egypt's legacy more than any king's decree? If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe to uncover more hidden histories. Somewhere, a worn sandal or a stained papyrus still holds the truth.